Are we products of nature or nurture? And how does karma and meditation fit into this, if at all? Okay. Nature and nurture. This is the big debate in psychology. It's the big debate in human development. Is how we are due to our nature, meaning our genes, that which comes into us biologically, genetically, or nurture, our environment, our parents, our upbringing? This is a very specific academic debate that has gone on for quite some time, particularly in the psychological community. And here's what we now know from all of the studies that we've done. We know that we are a product of both, of nature and nurture, but not only nature and nurture. So we are a product of our genes. We know that. There's a reason some of us have brown hair, some of us have blonde hair, some have blue eyes, some have brown eyes. There's a reason that some of us are tall, some are short. For some, it's really difficult to lose a pound. For some, it's really difficult to gain a pound. Some come into this world with athletic ability. Some come in with the ability to learn to sing. Others, we all have different skills that it seems like we've had since childhood. It's not that you wait till we've grown to discover who's an athlete, who can sing, who can dance, who can draw, who can paint. In nursery school, in kindergarten, early in elementary school, you start to see abilities, skills. You also start to see different aspects of our nature. Some people tend to be calmer, more peaceful by nature. They're the type of, yeah, it's okay, let it go, no problem. Even bad things happen, they're able to kind of keep smiling and brush it off. Not in denial, not in repression, but really just, it doesn't faze them so much. Then there's other people who seem to be bothered by the tiniest little things. Nothing is right. And again, a lot of this starts even from childhood. And what we know is, a lot of that is what we would call genetic. Not that there's a gene for being stressed and anxious and nothing being able to be right, but just that a lot of this is passed through in our DNA. Or it's passed through in a way that maybe we don't even yet know of our parents, biological parents. So actually as we are in the womb, actually that comes through. Now, I mention all of this because what they've done is they've done studies of children, twins, who are separated at birth. This is where all of these studies come. Because usually, people who have the same genes also have the same environment. Which people have the genes closest to each other? Twins. Siblings have similar genes. Cousins have somewhat less similar but more similar than general population, and on and on. Those who have almost identical genes are going to be twins. But they also have almost identical experiences. They're born at the same time, they're born in the same family, they grow up with typically the same opportunities. But now we've done all of these studies of twins who were separated at birth. Both were adopted, one was adopted. And what they find is, miraculously, 30, 40 years later, one loves strawberry ice cream, the other loves strawberry ice cream. One is a country singer, the other is a country singer. One can't stand the winter, the other can't stand the winter. One is an accountant, the other is an accountant. One has 3 children and has given them names of flowers. The other has 3 children, has given them names of flowers. I mean, really, really uncanny coincidences. But that only accounts for a little bit of the variation. It's fascinating, it's fun. Because the idea that you've somehow come into this world genetically predisposed to love coffee ice cream is sort of a fun thing to think about. Or that you could somehow be genetically predisposed to a certain type of career or to have your own family in a certain way. So that kind of stuff it's fun. It's interesting. But it doesn't actually account for the vast amount of variability. Interestingly, though, neither does the environment. You have the opposite situation then. You have same family environment, an adopted child who has been brought in. Different genes, exact same situation. Will you close the door, Nandini, sweetie? Thank you. Exact same environment, completely different genes. Again, some similarities, but not nearly enough to account for everything. And even when you take both into consideration, twins raised in the same environment, genetically almost identical, environmentally almost identical. Especially if they're identical twins, so 2 boys, 2 girls, so you don't even have distinctions of how boys are treated or how girls are treated. Nonetheless, vastly different in personalities. So what accounts for the difference? This is where a third element, which is made up of so many other elements, comes into play. And that's what we're going to call the us part of that. Okay? We're not our genes. We know that. We're also not our environment. We know that. We know that we've been impacted by our genes. We've been impacted by our environment. But we know that we are not them. Each of us can look back at our families. We can see where we've been impacted, but we also know where we have made different choices, where we've overcome certain challenges, or we have different values or different ethics or have made different decisions. Now this is where a different type of environment comes into play. And here's what's really interesting, because usually in the nature-nurture debate, nurture refers to environment. But that environment is the family environment, the school environment. Okay. But now we have a different type of environment. Now we have the environment that determines which of our genetic predispositions actually end up getting turned on or turned off. There's a great amount of research being done in a field called epigenetics, which says, okay, you have these genes. But even if you have these genes, that doesn't mean 100% this is going to happen. Right? I mean, these days now, they're coming up with all of these studies to see, do you have a gene for this type of cancer? Do you have a gene for this illness or that illness? But even with the gene, doesn't mean you're 100% going to get it. The gene means maybe you're 30% likely to get it, maybe 60% likely, but not 100%. And what the science of epigenetics is showing us is that more important than the gene itself is the interaction of the environment of the cell, means the bloodstream, with that DNA. So what comes into the cell? What activates those genes to be expressed? Now, I'm not going to go into all of this here. If it is something you're interested, Google Dr. Bruce Lipton, watch the incredible talks that he gives. He's a beautiful scientist that he gives about how the environment determines what turns on our genes. But what we know is what makes up the environment that our cells sit in, our bloodstream. Well, some of it's going to be genetic, sure. Some of it's going to be what we eat, because all of that which we eat ends up in our bloodstream. The food we eat, supplements we take, drugs we take, pollutants or toxins we're exposed to in our environment, all of this stuff ends up in our bloodstream. But also that which we think, which we always thought was just sort of relegated to our brain. What we now know is that there is a cascading impact of what we think, what we believe, how we feel, our emotional world, our thinking world, on our cells. Again, I'm not going to go into too much of the details of that right here, but what's important to know is that even this debate of nature and nurture is no longer something we can distinguish. Because suddenly the things that I would have considered nature, my genes, my cells, I now know are being moderated by what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm eating, what I'm breathing. Well, clearly that's environment, that's nurture. So even on a biological level, the two things are no longer one or the other. But then we come to this other element. And this is the us aspect, which is, what am I going to do with the genes I have? What am I going to do with the skills I have? What am I going to do with the abilities that I have? Does the fact that I prefer chocolate ice cream mean I'm going to eat 10 pints of it a day and develop heart disease and diabetes? Or does it mean that just when it comes to eating ice cream, that happens to be the one I choose? Well, that's up to me. This is about how I decide to live my life. And again, some of that we pick up from our parents, some we pick up from culture. But the huge variation that you see amongst 7 billion people, there are not 7 billion different types of nurture, 7 billion different cultural values. But we're all making different decisions. We all have entirely different internal worlds. And again, you see this even with people who share almost the same genes and in the same family. We look at siblings. In one family, someone who's so easygoing, gets along with everyone. Someone else for whom everything is a stress, everything is a problem, doesn't get along with people. Someone for whom life is a joy, someone for whom life is a burden, someone who's athletic, someone who's not athletic. All of this variation. Well, some of this, as the question said, what role does karma and meditation play? Well, some role of it is the role of karma. Karma plays a role in the nature, though, and in the nurture. Because karma is also impacting which womb I'm being born into, which family I'm being born into. Am I going to be adopted? Am I not going to be adopted? So karma begins working long before we've come out into this world. Karma is giving us a specific situation. But then karma also is playing a role in what we choose to do with the situation we're given. And this is where meditation, but not only meditation, this is where our choices play such an important role. The type of association we keep, the type of friends we keep, the type of mentors we have, the type of idols and models we have. Who is it we look at? I mean, there's no gene for who do you idolize, right? Is it that Bollywood or Hollywood actress or a model? Or is it the prime minister of that country? Or is it the founder of that NGO? Or is it this artist? Or this spiritual leader? There's no gene for that. This comes from within. It's impacted by our family, it's impacted by our environment, but not determined by that. The association we keep, who our friends are. Well, that not only is a choice we make, but that ends up creating an environment that leads us to make other choices. This is where we emphasize the importance of association, of sangha, of satsang. We know the difference that it feels of being in a haunted house. You know, how you feel inside. Simply being somewhere where the environment is scary. Yeah, some of it's mental, of course, but a lot of it's vibrational. What it feels like to be sitting on the banks of Ganga in the Aarti. That power of association. And so meditation plays a huge role. Because what meditation does is meditation helps us see the truth of who we are. It cleans that window so that we can see, okay, this is nature, this is nurture, but where am I in all this? What role am I going to play? What role am I going to play in giving myself a bloodstream that's healthy, that's peaceful, that's life positive, rather than illness positive? We also now know that people who make choices to serve others in a meaningful way actually not only are happier, which we could have expected, but are healthier than people who don't. Well, these are life choices. There's not a gene for that, or at least not one that we know of yet. It's also not only nature, not only nurture, many people from very materialistic families may come out into the world and end up being the most altruistic, selfless people, and vice versa. You could come from a very deeply spiritual, altruistic family and end up being super selfish and materialistic. These things happen. Live long enough, you see a lot of examples of these sorts of things. And so this is where really the question for all of us is not, is it nature, is it nurture, but how can I, with what I have the ability to change, impact my own life? Can't change my genes. Can't change the family I was born into. Can't change the family who raised me. So I cannot, in this moment, alter any of that. So the debate itself becomes sort of a moot point. It becomes almost an exercise in futility, although academically interesting. The real question becomes, what do I have control over? Okay, that was my nature. This was my nurture. Here's where I am now. Now what do I have the ability to work with? How much is nature and nurture determining my life today? And how much can I change that? And what we now know from a neurological perspective, from a psychological perspective, from a chemical perspective, from a biological perspective, we know that our choices, our thoughts, our decisions of how to live impact the nature of the bloodstream and of the cells, impact the functioning and the structure of our brain, which neurology did not know when I was studying it, but we now know it. So we have the ability now, with meditation, with power of thought, with our intention, with learning from the right teachers or mentors or guides or whatever it is, to actually transform our own nature and our own environment to create whatever it is we want to create in our lives. So we're our own hurdle now. But we are also our own possibility. And that's what's really exciting.